Welcome back, everybody, to this little old podcast called Chasing the Dream, where we're dedicated to speaking to subject matter experts on all things people-driven organizations and amazing workplace cultures. And I am so excited to have a gentleman with us today, Dana Palmblad. And I wanted Dana just give a little bit of an overview to folks who may not know you well, and then we'll dive right in if that's okay.
Sounds great.
Awesome. So Dana's a seasoned business leader who spent over 3 decades driving growth and improving performance for companies across many different industries, from founding successful tech startups to leading sales and marketing for established industry-leading organizations. Our guest, Dana, has a wealth of experience in strategy, market share expansion, and boosting productivity. So, Dana, welcome to Chasing the Dream.
Thank you. It's always good to talk with you, Ethan.
Well, likewise. And so you are an expert in all things people and performance. And we've talked before about how do you get the most out of people in organizational settings. But I'd be curious if you can just share what are some of your observations in over 3 decades spent working with organizations about what it takes to get people to perform at a high level consistently?
Well, and this is something I think you and I have talked about and agree on quite a bit, and that is that there has to be a clear vision, number one. You have to know where you're going, how you want to get there, and then there has to be a reason for your people to buy into that. I mean, I've sat in on numerous meetings over the years where the executives talk about all the wonderful things that they're going to do, how that's going to help them, how it's going to help the organization grow. But it never really ties back to the individuals and what's in it for them. And of course, we're all somewhat driven by, finding things are going to, play out well for us as well. So I think importantly, one of the things that you're focused on is creating a culture that respects the people, that respects what their motivations are, that respects what their goals and objectives are, and then figuring out how to align those with the organizational goals and the organizational structure. And that means empowering people and making them feel like they're part of that mission and not just a cog in the wheel.
That's so fascinating that you say that. You and I have talked about that before, and it sounds great. And we both know it sounds great. And we both know that coming out of the lips of the wrong individual who's not a leader, who doesn't care about their people, it's just lip service.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you not have an organization just talk the good talk, but how do you get them to actually connect their people's goals with their team goals and the organization's goals? Because what I just heard you say was there's a disconnect between the senior executive team and everybody else.
Yeah, I think you have to involve people within the organization in determining what are some of the overall plans that are put in place. Give them a voice. You don't always have to do everything that they ask you to do, or take all of it into consideration in terms of a final plan, but you need to involve them, particularly people who can be identified as leaders, who may not be leaders by title, but are certainly leaders in terms of how they're respected and followed within the organization. One of the things that I think you're highlighting is there seems to be an approach that says, I'm going to put together my mission statements and everything else, and I'm going to create all these posters and I'm going to put them on the walls everywhere. That doesn't create a culture. And a good friend of mine, when I was working at the Center for Creative Leadership, used to put it this way. He would say, if you want to create or change a culture, it is just like changing your reputation. So if you want to change your reputation, what do? You change.
Is that a rhetorical, or are you asking me?
It's a question. You change your behavior, right?
Exactly.
And so it starts at the top. You're going to create a culture that very much mimics or adapts to the leadership style that's in place. And if it is all just empty words, that's not going to create the culture that you want where people buy in. So I think it's very important to have a thoughtful approach to involve other people in the organization in terms of really thinking about what you want to create and how to get them engaged. Listen to them and empower them.
So what does that look like? Because I think you and I have talked about empowering people, but the notion of you not feeling like an organization can empower their people because they don't feel that they can trust their people because they didn't hire the right people based on behavior. So it becomes this vicious loop of not being able to trust, giving up control to people to make their own decisions. So how do you get organizations to shift that mindset? Because that's a pretty big leap in terms of behavior transformation.
Yeah, we touched on a lot there, which even goes back to what are your hiring practices? How do you make these decisions about people that you hire? Are they
Right.
people that you can trust? Are they people that not only you feel like you can empower, but who will take that challenge to be empowered and actually do something positive with it? Are they
Well, let me ask you a
trust?
question then, Dana. Dana, how do you identify the attributes of people who can show you that they can demonstrate a track record of success performing at a high level or self-motivation or self-challenge? How do you recruit for that? Because it's not always obvious the way we currently do talent acquisition.
Well, and you're probably a better expert at some of that than I am, but certainly
Okay.
I appreciate the value of some of the assessments that are out there to really help understand if you're talking to the right kind of person based on the assessments that they take. Depending on the level where you're bringing them in, sometimes a 360-degree assessment is a great opportunity to understand not only what they think about themselves and how they're perceived, but then also to be able to see how are they perceived by peers, how are they perceived by people that report to them, if that's the case, and how are they perceived by people that they report to. Now, depending on the situation, I'm assuming some of those may or may not be, may or may not be germane. But you can also, I think, in your interview process, ask a series of questions that'll give you some idea of what would you do in a given situation. It's funny. My daughter told me about this when she went in for a job interview a number of years ago. And the woman was talking to her, and I forget what question came up, but my daughter gave her an answer about what she would do. And she kind of went beyond, okay, here's the task that you gave me. And she talked about the other things that she thought probably should occur. And the woman said, well, that's really interesting. I haven't heard that before. Where did you get that? And she said, well, when I was a kid and we were at a restaurant, we were watching this lady refill the salt shakers.
Oh,
But
genius.
right, but she was not refilling the pepper, and the ketchup bottles were most of them empty. And I looked over at my daughter and I said, you know what? I can hire 100 people easily that when I say go do this, they'll go do it and they'll do it very well and come back. That's great. What I need are people that will do that, but look at the overall situation, come back and say, I was looking at this while I was doing it. It occurred to me these things were going to get left undone as well. So I did those. Oh my God, thank you. That's the person I want to hire, right? Um,
But that sounds different to me, other than your daughter from an early age was a rock star in terms of observing that kind of, organizational behavior. But that's really two questions. In search of the candidate who would actually fill up the pepper and the ketchup shakers, is instead of saying, how would you do this? It's tell me about a time that you faced,
oh yeah.
encountered a situation that's likely to happen in this job that you faced before. What was the challenge? What action did you take? What was the result? And looking back afterwards, what would you have done differently?
Yeah, you're exactly right. And I'm
Right.
not sure how the question was phrased to her. That was a number of years ago, but I found it interesting. Um, I
Yeah.
I also had an experience. I was staying at, it was the Embassy Suites in Times Square. And the hotel that I usually stayed at was booked. So I stayed here. I'd never been there before. And I remember when I checked in, there was a sign on the front desk and it said, our employees are empowered to say yes. And I thought, yeah, okay. Went to my room. I was trying to do some work. I could not get on the internet. I could not get their Wi-Fi to work. I was having all kinds of trouble. I called. They said, we're going to send up a maintenance guy. He's going to help you get it figured out. He came up. He could not get it solved. So he said, come with me. He took me downstairs into the maintenance office, sat me at the manager's desk, plugged me in, and said, "Will this help?" And I thought back to that sign and I thought, wow, that's not something that you typically see. So, what were they doing organizationally? What were they doing as a leadership team that made him feel comfortable? Because it was probably a risk, for one thing.
For sure.
But,
Right.
what I like is that people will say, look, you might overstep. And if you do, I'm going to let you know so you don't do it again. But don't be afraid to do the right thing for the customer. That kind of culture doesn't get created by putting posters on the wall. It gets created by actually showing people examples of what can happen and encouraging that kind of behavior. So, I might be oversimplifying it, but I don't know how to boil it down to anything that's formulaic.
I'm hearing a thread though of consistency of exceptional delivery of service. Them emulating the Four Seasons model almost. Is that has that been your observation just throughout your career of all of your consulting work and all of your experiences with fast growth strategies and how you consult organizations to perform? Is it just in general empowering employees, or does it go a lot deeper? The values that you've noticed are in those kinds of organizations that want their people to rise? Because you said it at the onset, not all organizations walk the walk.
Hmm. So
Because I don't see it as much as I think maybe you're framing it. Like I see a lot of organizations not doing the basic level of bringing in the right people.
I think you're right. Unfortunately, right? Which is why you're doing what you're doing, is to help people understand how to make that change, right? Because
But your observations about what it is in certain people, they're just hardwired to fill the empty salt shakers and the ketchup bottles. Like, what is it about I mean, share your insights, because I'm sure people want to know, where are these people? How do we find them? How do we keep them actively engaged?
I wish I could give you, I wish I
There's no
could give
secret
you,
recipe. There's
yeah, I
no
wish I could give you
algorithm.
a great answer to that question. Sometimes you got to kiss a lot of frogs,
Mm.
you know. I think one of the things that you need to realize is that it's not necessarily the most important thing to fill a position when you're looking for someone. It's critical to fill that position with the right person, because the costs that go into bringing somebody on board, getting them trained, getting them up to speed, and then hopefully having them get to production in whatever role that is. If you've got the wrong person, what a waste of time, money, energy. And not only do you lose, but ultimately they lose, because it's just not going to be a good match. So I do think it's important for people in those roles, whether it be HR, whether it be the particular business unit leader, whoever it is that's going to be doing the hiring, to really sit down and talk about it. We see a lot of, or I see a lot of job descriptions, for instance, out there. And I don't know that that's really the information that you should be going on in terms of describing what that role entails, what the job is going to be like. It's a list of certain functions. It doesn't have a lot to do with characteristics, for example. So I think you have to go deeper than that. But I wish I had a great answer to that. I don't know if I'm as strong in the hiring process as you probably are, but
Well, I think you do yourself a great disservice, because you see what performance looks like when organizations are holding people accountable to perform at a high level. I'm just always curious with, how do you get them there, or what do you look for, or once, what we haven't talked about yet, I'd love to know your perspective on, is you have these great people, right? And you brought them into your organization. Congratulations, they're here. But then to keep them performing at a high level, it's not just them, it's also the coaching. You assume that there's leadership to coach and mentor them. And any thoughts or observations about how organizations can do that a little bit more effectively?
well, I think you have to have a thoughtful approach to coaching and mentoring. Um, which goes beyond just saying, okay, Ethan, I'd like you to work with Dana. Okay, what does that mean? What are the things that we really want to instill in this person? What are the cultural things that we want to stay focused on? At least create a framework and then talk about, what are the things that you want to emulate? What are the things that you want to show them in terms of your own actions that would help them to understand what's the best way to perform within the organization? It's particularly challenging because a lot of the work that I do is focused in sales, for example. And one of the biggest mistakes that companies make is they take a top sales performer and assume that they're going to be a good manager or a good leader. Oh my gosh. The skill set that they have and the reason that they're very successful in selling does not necessarily translate into coaching someone. And in fact, it can be quite dangerous.
Well, and I wanted to ask you, that's actually a great segue into a specific question from a previous conversation we had that I'd love to ask you a little bit more clarity on is why do organizations keep doing that? They take an amazing, rainmaker, a great sales performer, and put her or him or them into a manager role. It just seems like it's the constant, move. And why do they always do that?
I'm not sure I have a great answer for why, except that what I've noticed in a lot of organizations is that they kind of set the sales organization aside as though we want to be really careful. That's pure magic that gets done over there. So all the things that we're doing over here don't really apply. So you very
Okay.
seldom see the same kind of, for instance, if there's a lot of succession planning and a lot of training for executives and that sort of thing, leadership development, a lot of times the sales executives don't really get included in that to the same degree. And so they themselves don't necessarily, that's why you see CROs or sales VPs come and go every 18 months because everybody just thinks, okay, here's this guy, he's going to have a better training program or whatever, and we're going to see miracles. And they don't really stop to think about how does sales need to integrate with the other parts of the business, whether it be customer experience, customer support, some of those obvious things, but finance, for example. How do we do a better job? I just posted something the other day about how do you do a better job of moving from your sales funnel or pipeline to an accurate sales forecast. Because what you see a lot of times is the salespeople present their pipeline. The manager says, well, this guy's, I trust him about 30%, so I'm going to take that number down. And then the manager gives it to the VP and they do the same thing across the different managers. And they hope for the best at the end of the day that they're going to create some kind of a forecast that's realistic. And if it's way behind, that's a terrible thing. Or if it's way over, that's not necessarily good either, especially if you're in manufacturing and you're trying to make sure that you're creating an opportunity to produce for what what you're going to be selling. So I think within the sales organization, there could be a lot more work to understand what are the key things that we need to have, for instance, in a sales manager versus a sales rep that are going to allow us to succeed. And that might be, when do they get involved? A lot of times they just want to come in at the end of the day when things are falling apart and try and be the super salesperson and close a deal that a salesperson's struggling on. Instead of having a clear process from the very beginning that says, here's how I'm going to evaluate these opportunities with you from the outset. Do you understand all the different buying influences that are involved and what degree of influence they each have and what their personal wins are in getting this done? How do I align to that? And using that as a method of going through these pipeline reviews with people so that you can work on strategy and perhaps some coaching along the way versus just trying to come in and be Superman at the end. And never, sales meetings become, storytelling time. And I met with this guy, they really liked me, it went really well, I think we're going to do great. Okay, but that doesn't tell me anything. Who's involved in the deal? What do they think? How many of you met with? Do you understand what any of their basic issues might be, and how are you going to overcome those? Have they expressed in their own words what they think the results of working with our solution will be, so that we can try and align? And just there's so many things that need to be brought into that I think you need to put into your coaching programs to help people understand how do I need to behave as a coach and a mentor to create success. They don't do that. You've done a great
Yeah,
job. You're 150% a quota the last 3 years. I'm going to move you into management position.
right. I think that's a
Tiger
very
Woods, how to swing a golf club. He goes and gets help because the way he does things is like asking me, how do you walk? I don't know. I put one foot in front of you. Yeah, but what muscles do you get? I don't know, versus a physical therapist who will tell you exactly if they're trying to rehabilitate a person, this is what we need to work on to break it down into pieces that make sense. I don't know. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does, and it's interesting that you're focused in terms of sales peak performance, and the idea of sales professionals are self-motivated. It's almost like this department of magic happens. Don't touch it, don't interfere because they generate the revenue. And yet, what you said previously is really fascinating to me about you take somebody and you just have them work with somebody else, whether or not they work well, you have them rely on each other to get the work done. And so therefore, shouldn't they share goals or have KPIs that match? But yet your job is to generate sales. Your job is this. You have roles, responsibilities, you have goals. There's no interconnectedness between people on a team. Let's say an account team, or you have one set of salespeople who sell into one industry sector with a longer lead time, or they have different technological considerations of feature functionality in their product set. All this other stuff, but you're just saying, here, you're at 150% of plan for the last 3 years, you'll become a manager. You never talk to them probably to ask them if their career and professional development, they want to be a manager, or maybe they just want to be the lone wolf. The other thing you never mentioned, but it's true because I spent my career as a marketer, a lot of times the marketplace dictates a salesperson's success. So if they've had a lot of support from the marketing effort to position themselves the right way in the marketplace, there'll be a reputational branding that'll facilitate the sales process. None of that is factored, or very little is factored into decisions about salespeople's peak performance. I could be at 150% of plan and honestly tell you, yeah, I'm at 50% of my max capacity. I'm bored.
Yeah.
So how do you, it almost sounds like you're going to say something really painfully obvious that I'm afraid of, which is
That's what I always do.
talking to these people individually to figure out what they want out of their careers. That's almost sounds like that's where you're going.
Well, how many times in a performance review, quarterly, annually, whatever it happens to be, do you actually talk to them about that? You talk about how they've measured up against certain performance metrics and what you want from them in the year going forward. Very seldom have I seen these kinds of meetings actually get into what is that person hoping to accomplish. I mean, they'll ask the questions, where do you want to be in 5 years? That's an awkward question.
Not here. I want to be, I want to be in your job. I want to be in any position where there's an opportunity for advancement. They're not going to say exactly what they're thinking, especially if you haven't built any trust with them.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Trust is a big thing. It's a very big.
How do you coach or how do you advise organizations to use trust as a vehicle for increasing productivity or performance? Because it sounds really important from your perspective.
Well, I think it is, but again, I think it comes from the interactions themselves. I don't know that you can tell somebody, okay, here's what you need to do to instill trust in another person. If you're down to the point where you have to do that, I don't know, you've probably got some issues I'm not qualified to to address. But
How do you do it on a day in, day out basis as a leader? How do you act in a certain way that people could say that's leadership? That's how you get the most out of people. Well, what are your observations about best practice?
there's a lot of talk about, quote, open door policy, for example. But is it really? Like, do people feel like they can come to you when they're having a problem or a struggle and admit the fact that, hey, I just don't feel strong in this. Here's what I'm trying to do, and I'm actually not doing it very well. Can I get some help? If they feel comfortable in doing that, then they're going to begin to trust you. In my software company, we didn't even have titles on our business cards, for example, because
Mhm.
I wanted it to be a collaborative. What I would say to people is, look, what I'm going to bring to the table is going to be very different from what you bring, but it's not necessarily any more important. So I want us to work together. So two things. One, I'm never going to be the micromanager that comes around every day and says, have you done this? Have you done that? Where are you on this? Where are you on that? We'll cover some of that, I suppose, in a meeting. But in reality, I want you to feel like you can do whatever it is you need to do to get the job done. And if you don't feel like you have what you need to get the job done, I want you to know, come to me and we'll work on it together. I don't I don't know how to put that into a formula for other people to follow, except to maybe, a lot of times I'll ask people, what's worked for you in the past? Why were you motivated? Who are some of the people that you worked with who helped you feel empowered, who made you feel it was okay to ask questions? Can you be vulnerable in this organization? Or if you are, you're going to get cut off at the knees. I've seen a lot of organizations where if you show any vulnerability at all, you just get a target on your head. God forbid you go to someone and say, I don't understand this, you know?
There's the trust. The trust is putting into practice, allowing other people to be vulnerable and be their authentic selves, and then to know that you have their back by putting them in a position to succeed. This is all the things that you're saying without using that language, but it's just consistent demonstration of you respect them, that you're giving them the tools they need, but they're allowed to architect their work as long as they're performing. And if they're not, what do they need from you? That's what I'm hearing.
Yes. And I think sometimes that even goes so far as to openly express where you've made a mistake. Maybe you're in a meeting and you say, man, I really pulled a good one here yesterday. This is what I did, and these are the results. And man, I learned from that lesson.
Uh,
If this person's not perfect, or they don't think they're perfect, or they're willing to share with me, I just think it becomes a behavior thing. And that goes back to what I said in the beginning. If you want to create a certain culture, you have to think about your behavior. How do you want people to perceive you? How do you want them to perceive the organization? And then don't put it on a plaque that you put on the wall. Think about how you need to behave for people to want to follow that.
yeah, it's modeling behavior is what I'm hearing from you. It's demonstrably showing how you expect other people to bring their values. Yeah, all those picture frames on the wall, that's just pictures that you can spend 25, 35 bucks on eBay or wherever, but that's not how people act.
Well, and then they become a running joke. The
Well, as
employees,
we've been doing throughout this episode, because we've seen them in I've seen them on the walls in Amazon fulfillment centers where they lose $8 billion a year across the company in turnover. So yeah, lots of pictures about teamwork, collaboration.
and then
Mhm.
you'll hear the employees, if you listen carefully, pointing to them after something happens and, making comments about, oh, isn't that funny? It just doesn't work.
Yeah, that speaks volumes, I think, to the actual, you've been saying a lot, the pictures on the wall is the marketing spin. That's the formal culture. That's what you want to believe it's like to work there. Then if you really want to know what it's like to go there, go into the fulfillment center or the call center and listen to what they're saying to each other and how they're treating each other is what I'm picking up on.
Yeah, it's similar to, I know there was a guy years ago that I can't remember his name, but he talked about what the market perceives versus what you think about your organization. And he called that the inside reality and the outside perception, right?
Mhm.
What you think may not be at all what is being displayed to the marketplace. And if that's out of line, you got a problem. Well, it's kind of true internally too, right? Whatever the
Right.
leadership says they think about the culture that they're creating may not be the reality at all. So how do you actually check for that? That does become difficult. And I think you also have to have some structure in place. So it's not just about modeling performance or modeling behavior. It's also about providing some structure to the way that you expect things to be done so that someone understands how to follow a certain structure to be successful. In sales, for example, that's really critical. I mean, if you're going to have that pipeline meeting and you're going to talk about ways that you evaluate opportunities in what are the most appropriate next strategic steps and how far are they really along, and is it aligned with the buyer's buying process, for example. You can't just use those words. You have to actually create a common language and a foundation for how do we look at, evaluate, and act upon those things. And if you don't, then that's your fault if people aren't able to perform to your standards. You haven't given them a way to do it.
I have heard, I mean, I spent 20 years in corporate American marketing leadership roles where I've supported sales organizations. So I've never had to sell until I went out on my own, but I always supported sales. And so I have a fondness for the particular set of challenges salespeople face because you just expect that they wave their pixie dust and they sell your product or your services, right? But the reality is they don't sell in isolation. They sell in a market with tariffs and supply chain and competitors and client procurement issues, right? And so when you've identified top performing salespeople, generally speaking, obviously they're self-motivated. Obviously, they're focused on goals of kind of converting prospects to clients. But what are some of the things that you see are behaviorally kind of things that would demonstrate that they're more than likely going to be successful or not? Other than they need support, coaching, mentoring, resources, they need all the organizational stuff. But what do you see when you say they're going to be a leader? They're going to perform at a high level. I know it's not an exact science. I'm putting you on the spot a little bit.
No, I think number one, curiosity. Do they actually care about the people that they're speaking to and what those people are trying to fix or accomplish or avoid? And are they just trying to sell your products and services? Or are they trying to help that person solve that particular issue that they're trying to solve? And even to the point where if it looks like that's not a good match, I'm not going to waste your time. You're not going to waste mine. The reality is we're not the right person to be talking to. Let me give you some advice on where I think you should go for that particular solution. But if I can, in that discovery process, understand that I really can help them accomplish that and accomplish it well, then I just need to, and I'm curious, who else is going to be involved? How are they going to be impacted if we make this decision? Because every decision involves change. Something's going to change when you make this decision. How's that change going to impact these other three people who are also involved in the decision? Some might perceive it as a threat. Others might perceive it as a benefit. I want to talk to those people and understand how they feel about it. What are they trying? So I think number one, curiosity, the ability to listen, and then the ability to translate what they hear into a structure that helps them understand and prove to them how we're actually going to address that. I can tell you, we're the best at this or we're the best at that, but I'm going to want to be able to back that up with, and here's why, and here's how, and here's an example of where we've done it before. So it's really just people who have the ability to communicate well and listen and translate that listening into some sort of action and don't leave any base uncovered. Especially today, there's so much. I've read several times here recently that a lot of these B2B buying organizations go through 75% of their buying process or evaluation process before they ever engage with a salesperson because of all the omni-channel stuff that's available, right? Okay. Well, now, it used to be if that was the case and somebody was 75% through their decision process before I talked to them, I knew immediately that's because they were already working with somebody else who helped them design that process, get through that process. And now I'm in a position where I need to be able to say, me too. Hey, I can do the same thing they can, get on even ground so that then I could discover what's missing from that and how do I go beyond that. So it was a very competitive situation. Well, now it's all, if that's true of all situations, If they're that far through the decision process, they're probably through that process and have gathered a lot of information from all my competitors as well. So now the skill of a salesperson is even more critical, not less. I've got CRM. I know when they came to the website, what they downloaded, what they seem to be great. What does that translate into? Who else is it? So now when I do engage with that buying organization, I really have to be curious and not to the extent that I'm interrogating people, but they need to understand I genuinely just want to help them sort through all the data that they've collected and make meaning of it so that they can make the right decision. Hopefully that's me, but I just need them to know I'm really just there to help them make the right decision. And that builds trust again.
This is an incredible perspective that you bring because almost it does to me sound like a need to shift the mindset of a salesperson in the 21st century from the sale is a transaction and that's no longer, I mean, obviously things are different by industry sector, product line, B2B, B2C, there's some, but you're saying, if I pick this up correctly, that it's a shift in mindset from selling to get the transaction, the cha-ching, to being much more of a problem solver, empathy, emotional intelligence, identifying what keeps the potential client up at night, what are their fears, and really come at it from they've gathered the information, as you said. I need to walk them through the forest and get them home safely. That to me is what I pick up on. I know that may be missing the boat, but
Well, I don't think
that's
it's
what.
missing the boat, except there's one thing that I would challenge in that. I don't think that's a shift in perspective that needs to take place. I've always felt that sales is a service. If I can help you accomplish something or fix something or avoid a problem, then perhaps a transaction will take place and you win because I help you solve your problem. I win because I've managed to sell my product to you. If those two things don't align, if you're going to win, but I'm going to lose because I'm discounting to try and get your business long term, that's going to turn into a lose-lose,
Right.
right? If you lose and I win because I don't give you the full story or I bend the truth a little bit, or I'm just focused on trying to make the sale, so I win and you lose, eventually that's going to turn into a lose-lose. If I want to create
Well,
clients that keep
all
back,
four scenarios, there's only one that works out really well. So there's win-lose, but somebody loses. Lose-win, somebody loses. Lose-lose, everybody loses. And then the win-win, it sounds to me, is when I've done an effective job of understanding your pain, your problems, and knowing enough about you that I can be of service to you. And if not, and you make a choice elsewhere, we've had such a good relationship through that process that hopefully you'll think about me if you need to come back and have another conversation about something else. Is that fair that somebody in a win-win?
oh, absolutely. That's the outcome that you want, right? And why would you do business with me if you didn't feel like I had your best interests in mind? And how do I portray that? I do want to help you sort through, especially now because there is so much information out there. I think,
Right.
sorting through all that from a buying perspective, and then to your point of dealing with internally, how do we make a purchase? How does procurement work? Who needs to sign off on it? Who's actually got the budget? You've got all these conflicting interests. That's bad enough. But now you got to really sort through the marketing information, the white papers, all the things that you've gone to all these websites and downloaded and make sense of it. If I can be the person that helps you just make sense of all that, I'm probably going to move to a little higher spot on the trust spectrum for one thing. And then we can align to, do I actually have a solution that's going to meet the needs of your organization and what you're trying to accomplish personally? And then if we do, I've provided a service, therefore I get compensated, not because I tried to push something down your throat or tried to make a transaction happen. So I think that's something that's always been true, but I think it's increasingly difficult for salespeople in the current environment, especially if you don't have some things in place that allow them when they come in at that late stage to navigate those things and actually interact with the customer in a meaningful way. So I think the technology's changed, but the basic principles of, good sales, I think they're the same that they've always been. To your point, emotional intelligence, trust, empathy. Got to have that.
Right now, and it sounds like you're saying now more than ever. So, I mean, Dana, we could talk as we've done before at length about all of this, but if somebody heard something today that they said, I really do want to follow up with Dana more directly and kind of ping him on this, how can somebody get in touch with you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn.
Okay.
They can certainly send me an email to dp@fastgrowthstrategies.com. And I think you're going to perhaps provide some information to them so they can
Oh, for sure. Look, if you want to get in touch with Dana and kind of pick his gray matter, all of his contact details will be in the description of the video below. So just go there. While you're there, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel, but all of his contact details will be there. And Dana, before you left today, I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for coming on Chasing the Dream. It's been phenomenal getting to pick your expertise.
Well, it's been great talking to you. It always is. They're my opinions. They're backed by some experience, but
Well, it's based on your experience. So thank you for sharing that.
Thank you very
Absolutely.
much.